Having now discovered that her sigil allows her to fly, Sephie left Acacia behind her. Her uncle's display of newfound power drove home a frustrating point that she can't take Meridian back on her own. She's gonna need allies. Sephie remembered that Acacia traded with the loggers to the east, and they're the closest source of people that she knows about. Plus, Meridian has bought wood from similar sources. With it, they built the beautiful ships that they took so much pride in. In fact, the ship builders got so caught up in their own work that they sometimes failed to consider where that lumber came from, specifically referring to Sephie herself. Oh, she had met sailors and merchants aplenty, the people who used the ships that Meridian built. But she never thought about the loggers before. And now, she finds herself opening issue 10, observing an entire society of them. We see a varied group of workers, men and women, all of them hard at work. They're largely dressed in a white shirt with beige or gray pants. Many of the men wear red caps. Some of the loggers hang from the trees, a complicated back holster managing their ropes. A sword-like sheath houses large handsaws on their backs as well. On the ground, various factions do different jobs. Some of them build a base of some kind for a building or maybe a ship. Others wrangle nets over the piles of floating wood. A team of 8 transports one of the logs like a Macy Day parade float. Several ships hang in the sky above all of this hustle and bustle. All of the ships are long, with a tall mast at the back end, holding a furled sail in place. In the center of the ship is an arc of wood, into which the logs are guided. Their natural buoyancy then holds them there against the ship. Whatever it is that makes some of the islands of Dimitri afloat, it seems to do the same to the wood. For Sephie, this sight felt odd. The camp would finish their work here, then move on to the next section of the forest. They had no specific island or province to call home, and that didn't really sit well with her. But it did remind her of home, at least a little bit. The noise of the work, of people chatting, calling orders, saws, grinding through wood, logs colliding. The hustle and bustle of hard work felt very familiar to Sephie. How she would have loved to have just flown in, told them her story, and then asked for their help. Instead, Sephie's experience with Acacia had taught her a little bit of caution. She still needed a ship, and she knew now that she shouldn't expose her powers so quickly. So instead of flying in, she sank down to the ground, landing at the mossy base of a tree, and just walked into the camp. A handful of loggers stopped what they're doing almost immediately. They recognize the colors of Acacia on sight, and they've seen enough refugees from there to give them help without even thinking. They do start asking questions and offer Sephie food and water, but the only thing that she asks for is to have her chain, which is still attached to her leg, removed. A nice older man with a gray beard, named Hondel, starts chatting her up a little bit. How long did you last there? You aren't very pale. You must not have been there for very long. A large hand then drops on Hondel's shoulder, and a giant of a man reels him in. This is Kotzen. He is like 6'8" of pure muscle, with a kind face and a bald head. Hondel jokes that the Acasians dumped Kotzen here into the swamp as a kid. That's why he's bald. Is that true? Sephie asks. Kotzen smiles warmly. It sure is. It gave me all the brains that Hondel doesn't have. Now let me show you where to get that fine jewelry off your leg. As they approach the blacksmith, Sethin, Kotzen shouts out, Sephie here needs her leg cut off! Sephie pauses at this. Wait a minute, what? Oh, I'm sorry. Was I not specific enough? Kotzen asks jokingly. Sephie then sits where directed, and her leg is stretched onto a blacksmith's anvil. I was hoping to keep the leg, she jokes, finally beginning to pick up on the humor here. A young man holding the large spike at her chain nods. Well, we'll do what we can. Sethin is blind, you know. Sethin raises his heavy hammer into the air. Blind, bow-legged, and drunk. Sephie's starting to get a little worried, but Kotzen assures her that if these two hurt her at all, he will kill them. That statement throws Sephie the most. You can't be serious. Oh, I sure am, Kotzen replies. If Sethin's aim really is that bad, death is the only thing for him. As they're chatting, Sethin takes the time to swing his hammer down and strikes the nail. With one blow, the iron shackle is split in half. Sephie is free. Kotzen asks her to forgive their bad jokes. How did she make it all the way here? Sephie examines her chains ruefully. Oh, I just kicked a Selenog in the face with this bad boy, shoved the rest out of my way, and then flew here. Well, with that sense of humor, you'll fit right in, Kotzen replies with a smile. But humor works best if you keep it believable. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 32.9 of Meridian, Forging New Bonds. Character growth in comic books. How I've missed you. Obviously, a big part of Meridian's main story is Sephie just growing up. She faces various hardships, she learns from them, or fails to learn from them, and grows accordingly throughout the length of the series. This issue is a perfect example of this idea. Sephie was incredibly open about her identity and powers with Acacia, and Minister Mariah tried to use her because of it. So when she sees this camp, her natural instinct, her natural being is just, let's fly in and say hi to everybody. They're gonna love me. The fact that the general vibe of the camp even reminds her of Meridian only makes her more inclined to drop her guard and just waltz right in. But Sephie learned an important lesson from Acacia. She is still willing to trust these loggers, but not with everything. Not anymore. This is a big change for our girl, as she's been pretty fearless throughout this run. You could say maybe a little bit reckless. When the muse of Gaiatan suggested that she confront Ilahn about the portrait that he wears, she not only did it, she did it in the open, in front of other people. It's not like she walked into a separate room and she was like, Uncle Ilahn, I got an important question for you. No, she said it right in front of Boscow. Sephie also didn't hesitate to steal a ship and flee Catador. I do think it's interesting that she was nervous about stealing a ship from Acacia, but she did not feel bad at all about stealing a ship from Catador. There's been no mention of, well, I figured I'd borrow the ship and then send one back. No, she's okay with just stealing that one. Sephie wasn't afraid of doing the death dive, and during her time in Acacia, Sephie wasn't even afraid of confronting the Selenog in order to save that child back in issue 6. Then we saw her stand her ground with a pack of them in the last issue. Sephie's got a pretty cool head in an emergency. She's got the arrogance of youth on her side. And of course, she does have a super-powered sigil backing her up as well. What does she have to fear? Well, her uncle, for one thing. And imprisonment again, I guess. There's always that. So I do think that it's nice to see her learn from her history, learn from the things that we've experienced alongside of her, and adjust her strategy moving forward. Our introduction to the loggers clearly is trying to give us this idea that they're a little bit dangerous. Because you combine the idea that these loggers are potentially dangerous with Sephie's fears, and we're clearly meant to be on guard around these folks. Are they allies? Are they enemies? We don't know yet. So, much like Sephie, we are getting to know them a little bit here. The older man, Hondel, is asking Sephie a lot of questions, but you can see that there is an intelligence behind those questions, too. He notices that Sephie isn't pale enough to have been in the factory for any length of time, so she must have been a relatively recent acquisition. You can see Hondel starting to put some of these pieces together, and I would argue that that is a good thing for him. Hondel probably wants to make sure that no one hurts or harms the logging camp. The logging camp almost immediately has this very familiar, almost familial sense about them. Everybody knows everybody trusts everybody, and they're all willing to joke and poke fun at each other. It's a very relaxed feeling environment. And so the idea that Hondel would be protective of that feels right, and it feels like it makes a lot of sense. Even if the character does come off as friendly to Sephie, so did Minister Mariah, and she tried to hurt Sephie. So I do think you can see some logic behind this. Kotzen is a character that I just like a lot. He's got an incredibly dry delivery to his humor that I really appreciate. It makes him incredibly hard to read, so when he is super friendly to Sephie at the start, but then immediately threatening Sethin with death, I'm really caught off guard here. Is Kotzen being serious? Is he joking? Is he maybe hiding a darker streak inside of his comedy? We don't know yet, and I think that is intentional on the part of author Barbara Kessel. But I have to admit, as much as I'm trying to sell this point to you all, I have never felt worried about this group. It is a bit hard for me to consider in hindsight, as I have read these issues of Meridian dozens of times, and it's been a lot of years since the first time I did so. So my first impressions have faded to history. That stuff's just gone. But I don't recall ever being actually suspicious of them, or even worried that they would hurt Sephie. When Sephie does first show up, the general populace is so immediately welcoming and concerned for her. They recognize her work uniform from Acacia, and they just immediately move to help her, which indicates to me that they have a long history of doing this. So they're generous and kind with all of the runaways that they've encountered. Why would we assume that they would be any way different with Sephie? So for all the work that author Barbara Kessel is putting in to make this group suspicious, I personally have never felt that. It's hard to tell if that's my own nature or Sephie's nature, or even me adopting a little bit of Sephie's nature, reading all of these issues of Meridian in a row. I honestly just like all of these people right off the bat, and it kind of feels like Sephie does too, especially when Kotzen asks, hey, how did you get here? And she responds with the same kind of joke that Kotzen would have given if he had been in her situation. She's going, I get you guys. We're on the same wavelength here. And so I don't think the imagined threat, let's say, of the loggers comes off very well. It really does feel like Sephie could walk into the camp and be like, hey, I got a superpowered sigil. I'm the Minister of Meridian. I can fly and heal things. Can anybody give me a lift? And the loggers would just be like, yeah, bro, sure. In Canador, Minister Ilahn returns to his estate after his rather frustrating and fruitless trip to the surface. Not that he'll ever do something like that again. Bosco, have all trade ships rerouted and all contracts with Acacia rescinded. I am never setting foot there again, Ilahn says. As he enters his home, he is ranting to himself about the pointlessness of the trip. This doesn't just communicate his distaste for the events of the last issue, it also summarizes the last issue from his perspective. From a writing trick perspective, that's smart. This is a really cool thing that Kessel does here. Again, Meridian does come with a summary of what has happened in the story so far on the inside cover of the comic, so you don't really need the previous few issues summarized, but if you do, and you can fit it naturally into the world, this is an old skill that comic books have had for decades, where every comic could be someone's new comic. You need to introduce a lot of information to a new reader relatively quickly to get them up to speed, and I think Kessel does a really good job of doing that here, even if it's not necessary. LaRossi, meanwhile, has been struggling to get Ilahn's attention this entire time, finally reporting that he has visitors. Ilahn does see Reesha and the Muse, and he lights up at their presence. Ah, Muse, I thought you had abandoned me. I admit I was disappointed. The Muse makes no excuses for her disappearance to Ilahn.
My path is my own. Instead, you should focus on this. I have someone you would benefit from meeting.
Ilahn then smiles at Reesha. Miss Teramu and I are already acquainted. Then Reesha greets him, welcoming him home. But that's not what the Muse meant.
Ilahn controls much of this world. Now is the time to claim the rest. With this introduction, your power shall grow.
The Muse of Gaetan gestures at a man. He's dressed in fine clothing, rich leathers, gloves, boots. His hair is cut pretty short, although it stands up a little bit to form like a flat top, kind of like Guile from Street Fighter. It connects to his beard, and his hair is all a light brown. Ro Rustain greets Minister Ilahn and says that he's come a long way to meet him. In the air behind Ro, we can see a ghostly figure. It looks like Ro. It mimics his position, his general appearance, but bigger and dressed in armor and incredibly well muscled. His hair is bigger, his face harder, and his eyes glow red. Ilahn doesn't see this, though. He bows slightly, asking Ro for his title. But here, Ro says that he doesn't have one. I'm just a merchant. The muse here speaks highly of you, well enough to draw me here from Elysia. I was hoping you could make time to hear a proposal from a fellow businessman that could profit us both. Ilahn strokes his chin. I know Demetria well, but I've never heard of Elysia. Ro smiles ruefully. That is because Elysia is not on Demetria. Now it's Ilahn's turn to smile. Ah, interesting. In that case, why don't you have a seat? Let's dispense with titles, shall we? Call me Ilahn. Now, tell me about your city. This is one of those moments where, if you had been reading multiple CrossGen comics all at one time, you would know quite a bit more about Ro's general deal. And I'm not actually going to be getting into it here, as the character is kind of going to explain exactly what's up with him over the course of the next few issues. This isn't something that Kessel is teasing. This is an active storyline that we have just kind of stumbled into. So we'll put a pin in this for now. We are going to get there. Now, the stuff with the Muse, though, is interesting. Because for the most part, we have seen the Muse coaching, mentoring, Ilahn in the kind of broad picture usage of his sigil. She has helped Sephie a little bit too, giving her just enough of a push to get off of Katador. And even for myself, I thought that the Muse did that as a way of helping Sephie, like getting her to leave Katador, put Sephie on the path to Acacia and the hard lessons that she learned there. She's learned to control her powers a lot more. She knows she can push, she knows she can fly, she knows she can heal other objects. The Muse orchestrating the conflict between Sephie and Ilahn put Sephie onto the path that she's now walking, gathering allies in order to win back Meridian. And we're going to see even that snowball into bigger things as the book goes on. But when I broke down this issue and I started thinking about this scene and what's coming up in the Meridian, I actually don't think that the Muse was really helping Sephie when she put her on this path. And yeah, I do acknowledge that that's part of the game. The Muse has to kind of play both sides against the middle. I honestly think that the Muse's main focus all along in Meridian has been Ilahn. She revealed herself to Ilahn first. She's coached him in the usage of his sigil. Revealing to Sephie the secret of Ilahn's close-held portrait drove her away, and when Ilahn thought that she was dead, it seems like he kind of cut off that sentimental part of himself. Like all of his concerns for family and decorum died with Sephie. And so Ilahn looked away from Sephie, and he found Reesha instead, someone who isn't questioning him, who isn't bothering him, who honestly respects him as a teacher and is eager to learn his methods. And notice that despite having Acacia outright tell him that Sephie is alive, she just escaped, he doesn't seem to care. So either Ilahn actually thinks that Sephie is dead, and he thinks that Minister Morry was just trying to manipulate him, or he just doesn't actually care about her. Now we've got the Muse introducing him to Ro, which is going to expand the scope of his greed and further cement Ilahn as a force that Sephie has to stand against. Right now, she's standing against him mostly out of self-interest. Her island's been taken over, she wants her home back, she won't let him ruin Meridian. But that's going to change over the course of the next several issues, and I really think that begins with the Muse manipulating Ilahn. Wow. In hindsight and upon closer examination, this issue is really a pretty big turning point for Ilahn's overall role in the comic. I've never noticed that before. And quite honestly, this is what I love about doing breakdowns. I genuinely love Meridian. And sure, I love it less than some other CrossGen comics, and even just some other comics in my life, but I love Meridian overall from beginning to end, and getting the chance to look at it and see patterns and ideas and concepts that I've never seen before. Partially because I'm a better educated reader, partially because I'm older and I've got a little bit more wisdom and experience, and partially because doing all of these breakdowns gives you some skill in picking these things apart. And I think that's really interesting. Unfortunately for the ease of the comic's narrative, I did have to ruin author Barbara Kessel's nice transition between scenes. Ilahn asked Ro to tell him about his home in Elysia, and we then move over to the loggers' camp, which is exactly what Sephie is doing with them. She is wrapping up her story when we cut back to her, telling the loggers everything except some of the more, sigil-related aspects of it. They know that she is the minister of Meridian, they know that she fled Catador, and that she has now fled Acacia. Sephie adds that she is raising an army to stop her uncle. But in order to do that, she needs to get back home, and that means borrowing one of their ships. If they let her do so, then she will bring back 2 brand new ships as payment. Hondel, who's eating some kind of stew, nods.
And how exactly do they know that'll happen?
Sephie offers them her promise as the Minister of Meridian. If they do this, she can, Meridian can fix and even strengthen their existing ships. That's not awkward at all, Sephie. Nice job. She clearly means to use her sigil to help them out, but she doesn't want to reveal that yet. Way to almost blow your cover, girl. Yeah, that's real nice, Hondel says. But we use those ships to make our living. If even one of them is gone, then that hurts us all as a group. But our next shipment for Meridian is due soon. If she doesn't mind waiting a spell, they can just send her along with it. While this transaction is being worked out, we move to the nearest wooden barge. A pair of men are loading it. A younger one, a guy named Garrus, is noticeably distracted by the cute new girl in camp. He ends up cutting the wrong line, and suddenly the whole pile of wood bursts free. He tries to grab the rope, but his co-workers shout him back, fearful that he's going to get hurt. Another one shouts for the barge to move, but it's too late. The logs fly upward and slam into one side of the ship. It now rotates upward, freeing even more of the trapped wood. The workers on the ship scrabble for rope or handhold. There is nothing they can do to stop this. And all of that wood just floats further up at a beautiful command ship. Sephie's inner narration kicks back in, commenting on accidents. They happen, and they suck, but they do give people a chance to learn what they can do. For Sephie, this now meant exposing herself. She could maybe do something about this with her powers, but should she? Could she even hold the timber back? And how would the loggers react to seeing her do this? Papa's teachings had no guidance for her in this matter, but she didn't need them. The people of Meridian would never hesitate to help someone, and she is a daughter of Meridian, now and forever. Sephie's hands glow yellow, and she rockets into the sky. Passing by the logs quickly, Sephie spins around and thrusts out her hands. A glowing yellow field of energy catches the timber, but they don't stop immediately. We can see the logs push against Sephie's power, bowing that field out, and we can see her struggle. But manipulating the power feels much more natural to her now. She even finds that she can kind of absorb some of the energy of that impact, using it to reinforce her force field. She ends up pushing the wood back underneath the nearest barge. It wasn't easy, but she did it. As Sephie flies back to the loggers, a pair of them watch her kind of shocked and quietly amazed. That girl is flying, Rune, one of them says. Yeah, I see that, Bairn, the second replies. Now, the loggers had finally seen what Sephie could do. But how would they react to her? She wondered what these people were really like at the beginning of the issue. And now, she would really find out. We find Sephie by herself at the start of issue 11. After her display of sigil power, the loggers were surprisingly kind to her. She does not elaborate on this anymore, so if you would have liked to have seen a direct reaction from them, you don't get it, and neither do I, and yeah, it makes me a little sad. Despite their kind welcome, Sephie still felt like she needed to be alone to herself for just a minute. After all, the surface was such an alien place to her, even now. In roughly the span of a single day, Sephie had seen the length of 2 meridians. The surface just seemed to ramble on, endless, with no rim to catch it. At least at night, with the stars above shining, she recognized those. Her papa was watching her from up there, and watching over Meridian. I hope Meridian's okay. Footsteps from the woods interrupt Sephie's reverie. From the darkness, a voice calls to her. Sephie holds up her lantern and squints into the darkness. We can make out the short form of the Muse of Gaiatan.
Know me,
She states, her words filled with orange power. As she says this, the Muse is enveloped in a larger shadow. She seems to become 2 people, the short, older Muse and a tall, well-built man. This man then steps from the shadows into the light, and Sephie relaxes. Oh, she recognizes Gaiatan immediately. Gaiatan, for the record, is about a head taller than Sephie. I would say that he's in his late 20s or 30s. He sports a red handlebar mustache and short-cut hair. His clothing is of a similar fabric as to the other loggers, but different in color. Most of the loggers tend to wear blue, pink, or white, but Gaiatan wears a brown top with black short sleeves. He also has on black leather gloves. His pants are a darker brown color, bottomed out by leather boots. Gaiatan does look like a logger, but he also doesn't, if you get my drift. And notably to us, his eyes glow orange. He poetically offers Sephie a penny for her thoughts, and she says that she's just eager to get home. Gaiatan looks at her. When he speaks, his words are filled with a power. Sephie, you will get home, he promises. But first you have to go down even further. Gaiatan points to the mountains and tells Sephie to go to the caverns. A gift is waiting for you there. He then suggests that it's time they rejoin the others. And kind of coming out of a fog, Sephie agrees. They've been so kind to her, it's rude for her to ignore them. In fact, why rush the delivery back to Meridian? I've never been on the surface before. I should visit the caverns, gather more allies to stand against my uncle. In the background of this dialogue, Sephie does think to herself that Gaiatan is so comforting. It's like she's met him before, even if she can't remember meeting him at all. It's like he's always been there. Anyways, Sephie continues talking. No one has ever united the cities of the caverns, the surface, and the skies before. If she can ally them all together, they'll have the 3 parts of trade, resources, craftsmen, and transportation, all without Catador. When their powers combine, they create an economic force that could challenge even Ilahn, Sephie says. Do you think I'm doing the right thing, though, Gaiatan? He acknowledges that this road she is on is a hard one, but if she sees it through, then he is sure that it'll lead her back to Meridian. As they close in on the camp, we see them approaching 3 shadowy figures. One of them is Kotzen, the second is a new guy that we haven't seen before, and between them is Garrus, the young man who cut the wrong rope last issue. They ask if he acknowledges his mistake, and Garrus does. He explains what happened, confirming his understanding of said mistake. They then ask if he is ready to accept punishment. Garrus does balk a little bit, but then he hangs his head. He's glad that no one got hurt. He's glad that girl saved them. He made his mistake, and he's ready for his punishment. They gesture for him to move on. Carry that thought, they say. It's a short trail before you, but it will be the longest of your life. Standing before Garrus are 2 rows of people. His fellow loggers create a path before him, and they're all holding axes. At the end of the trail is a stump with an axe embedded in it. Beyond that is a raging bonfire. As Garrus walks past the members of the camp, everyone says accusatory things. Shame on you, lad. It's your mistake. You put the whole camp in jeopardy. When he finally reaches the stump, Garrus kneels. Sethin now steps up and grabs the axe that was embedded in the stump. For the good of the camp and the atonement of all, this error must be sacrificed and fed into the fire. Strike! He calls out. Sephie finally dashes forward at this, crying out for them to stop! Don't kill him! It was just a single mistake! But the axes bite true, sinking into an ornately carved block of wood. Garrus had been carrying this block the entire time, clutched tightly to his chest. After being struck by the axes, the small pieces of wood start to float up into the air, and the camp realizes what Sephie shouted at them. They all start laughing. The group starts to collect the shattered pieces of wood, and Garrus smiles at Sephie. Yeah, that was his mistake. And now that it's been absolved, here. He hands her a piece of the wood and tells her to feed it into the fire. Conson explains that this is how they handle accidents in the camp. If someone can't find a way to let go of a failure, then they'll carry it with them. That could cause greater accidents and make more bad things happen. So instead, here in the loggers' camp, they carry their mistake a short ways, just long enough to feel the heat of all those eyes and the weight of the mistake in their arms. Then they toss it into the fire and move on. You don't have to make the same mistake here twice, Kotson says. Believe me, you make new ones. Sethin steps up here. They know that alienating the Minister of Meridian would be a big mistake, so they'll free up a ship for her. Sephie thanks them, but does pass on their offer. What she really needs right now are allies and introductions. Can anyone here show her to the caverns? Even with her sparkly hands, Kotson figures that she's going to need help with that crew. They can spare a few people to go with her, and they'll show her how to handle herself in these parts. Deal? He says with a smile. And yes, they do. I love the opening sequence of issue 11. We have now seen examples of what life on Demetria is like in several different settings. Each of those locations feels different, which helps make Demetria feel more like an alien fantasy world, which it is, but it still makes sense to us as an audience. We have seen the quiet, simple life of Meridian, the moody hustle and bustle of Catador, the beautiful but dangerous Acacia, and now the loggers, who have perhaps the greatest sense of personal freedom, but also, as demonstrated now, a greater shared responsibility than perhaps any of the other citizens of the other cities. This general idea helps make Demetria feel more like a real place because it makes sense to our logic as an audience. Sure, author Kessel could just throw in some random, more magical, more fantastical things, dragons and sandworms and stuff like that, but honestly that would just disrupt the sense of realism that she has been cultivating in the book so far. By keeping Demetria fairly grounded and realistic up to this point, Sephie's and Ilahn's powers feel even more fantastic in comparison. The work done with the loggers in this particular scene feels really like a natural extension of what we saw in the previous issue. Because their work is so dangerous, the loggers have to take their job seriously. But in order to blow off that steam, they also joke around a lot. That makes it feel like maybe they're a bit too relaxed, especially when Kessel tells us that they just welcome Sephie and have no questions or qualms about her showing up out of the woods. But showing us this scene with Garrus reminds us that the loggers have their own concerns and problems to deal with. Sephie is a weird problem, sure, but Garrus is one of them. If he does end up carrying the guilt of his mistake with him, it might make him more nervous when he is working. He may become even more accident-prone as he tries to overcompensate for his original mistake and prove himself to the camp. And I love that the camp does hold him accountable for his action. He is the one who has to carve that log. He has to carry it to the chopping block. Everybody gets a chance to go, "You screwed up, kid! Don't do it again!" and express their own anger and disappointment. But then they just destroy the log and they toss it into the fire. The mistake happened. The emotions that came with it have happened. And now it's gone, sacrificed to the future, and they all move forward together. Garrus trusts that the rest of the camp will accept him openly, and the camp trusts that Garrus has learned his lesson. It's honestly kind of beautiful in my mind. And I think that it fits with Sephie in particular so well. So much of her journey up to this point has kind of been her tripping over her feet through the world, making mistakes, learning lessons, and then moving forward in spite of those things. We saw her apply the lessons learned in Acacia to her greeting of these loggers last issue, after all. I do think it's a bit weird that no one in the camp bothered to explain what was going on to Sephie at all regarding the ceremony. In fact, I'm kind of weirded out by the idea that no one here really treats Sephie like an important figure at all. We've been told that the Sky Cities are kind of a ladder up the social strata, right? That's where you go to live when you've made a certain amount of money. People who live on the surface are poor and they have to do these kind of dangerous, crappy jobs like logging or dyeing fabrics. So you would think that there would be some kind of, I don't know, quiet resentment towards the upper class for people like Sephie, or some kind of respect for the people who come down from the islands. And, you know, Sephie is the minister of Meridian. Like, this is the governor of your state showing up at your job, and no one gives a crap about the fact that he's there. It's just, it's super down to earth, and personally, I really like this approach. Maybe it's because I grew up in a rural area myself, and I was taught to kind of respect people more for how they behave than for their station. We did see Minister Morry fail to provide a carriage for Ilahn as well, which he took as a personal insult. So maybe surface people are just like backwards when compared to the Sky Islanders, which there is clearly a bit of a difference being shown to us between the Sky and the surface dwellers, but Kessel isn't really reinforcing it very much in this scene. And admittedly, Sephie's journey moving forward from here is going to be about her creating bridges, forging new bonds, and not like pissing people off. So it would make sense to kind of just turn your eyes away from any social issues that should be coming up to just keep the story moving forward. Now the stuff with Giten is all new, and issues 10 and 11 of Meridian are what finally sold me on this comic when it was first being released. The first time that I read Meridian, it was definitely the CrossGen title that I was least interested in out of the original four. Scion had swords and dragons and Jim Chung on artwork, and I already loved his stuff. Mystic had magic and all that fantasy kind of stuff going on, and a hot babe for a lead character, and Brandon Peterson on artwork. Sigil had spaceships and lizard people and superpowers. It was all big crazy kind of stuff. This was all the super cool, super fantasy and sci-fi stuff that I had grown up loving. I loved that stuff. Meridian, in comparison, had boats and islands and socio-economic drama and an incredibly slow-burning romantic subplot. That ain't even a thing right now to Sephie. And, as previously stated in other episodes, I wasn't really in love with Josh Middleton's artwork either, so that wasn't helping me. Kessel's slightly more relaxed narrative was certainly interesting, but compared to the other books in CrossGen's stable, it was also really slow. Whenever my finances got tight at the time, Meridian was the first book from CrossGen that I considered dropping. I never did, but I did think about it very regularly after issue 7. Until issues 10 and 11 finally set Sephie off on her own adventure. Gave her some direction. Gave her something to work towards, right? And we kind of get a little RPG-style adventuring party to go with it as we get to the end of the issue. Okay, I thought, now we're cooking. And that direction that I like so much comes mostly from Giten, specifically in this moment. So the muse of Giten, whatever she is, appears able to create new versions of herself. More interestingly, she appears able to manipulate reality with her words. Sephie outright says that she remembers Giten, although she doesn't know why she remembers him. And she does trust him pretty openly, asking him some kind of big questions that I wouldn't ask of a stranger, like, do you think I'm doing the right thing? Man, I don't care what a stranger thinks about what I'm doing. You can go back to your logging camp, thank you very much. Didn't you notice I wanted to be left alone? But Giten, well, we trust Giten. What a nice guy Giten is. This is one of those moments, again, where if you had been reading more than one CrossGen comic book, you would have a better understanding of what is happening here. By showing us this, CrossGen continued to show that the various mentors in their titles weren't just allies. They were a united force, potentially stemming from the same source. All of these characters were equipped with orange eyes. All of them could speak and then make things happen, manipulating reality. And almost all of them have a mention in their story of fitting into the worlds that they are working in. And we also have a slightly weird name affectation here for the muse of Gaetan and then Gitan, both being incredibly similar names. This is something that doesn't happen with any of the other mentors, but it is clearly meant to be a clue as to their shared nature here in Meridian. It also clears up how Gitan is supposed to be pronounced, at least a little bit, so please forgive my Gaetans in the previous episodes. That is still what I hear in my head, and I'm probably going to mix them up going forward, but I will try to stick with Gitan moving forward in the podcast. There is, however, a potential conflict with this storytelling element. On the final page of issue 10, right when the other loggers are staring up at Sephie in amazement, whoa, she can fly, Gitan is there. For those of you watching this on YouTube, see? Right there. Same outfit, same hair, same orange eyes. So maybe the muse was just like borrowing his identity here, maybe copying his form or something like that. If the muse can create new identities at will and then travel throughout the world easily, which it seems like she can do, why would she go to that trouble? Creating a mentor specifically for Sephie does make some degree of sense, because if the muse is allied with Ilahn and helping him, Sephie might not trust her moving forward. But Gitan has no connections to anything or anyone. He's a blank slate. Between Gitan showing up and Rorustain over on Catador, Meridian has suddenly had its connections to the broader CrossGen universe solidly reinforced, where previously it's been pretty standalone, to be quite honest. At this point in all of their individual narratives, Scion, Mystic, and Sigil were already interacting with some of those broader concepts on a way more intimate nature. We had been investigating the mentors a little bit over in Sigil. They had been battling or allying with various members of the first, CrossGen's gods. Meridian has just been building up Ilahn, Sephie, and kind of exploring Demetria so far, really like solidifying the conflict between these two characters. And that's been good work, but I won't lie. It is satisfying to me to see these other storylines and ideas that are a part of the fabric of the CrossGen universe begin to crop up. I love a shared universe of comics, and so the more distance a book is from that shared universe, the less invested I become of it. A perfectly good comic like Meridian can feel kind of lackluster when big reveals are happening over in Sigil or Mystic. For me, this change in Meridian was a change for the better, and it solidified Meridian as a must-buy for me. Let's take another look at one of those connections now, as we return to Catador, where Ilahn and Reesha have been talking with Rorustain for hours. The sun has set, the door to the study has been locked, and both Bosco and LaRosi are kind of outraged at being kept out of things. It is going to be a mess in there. Kessel uses their dialogue to kind of explain this plot point back to us. Again, if you hadn't been reading, they kind of summarize things for you. Inside the study, we see that Ilahn has been practically dumping alcohol down Rorustain's throat as he has continued to question him about his home, Elysia, while Ilahn has cautiously kept from imbibing. Ro, however, continues to dodge these questions, saying that he's just a like-minded man. Is generosity unheard of on this world? Ilahn has remained cool, though. Accepting Ro's generosity would make him a vassal to the other man, and this he will not accept. Ilahn has his own power. He doesn't need a relationship of codependency. Fine then, I take it back, Ro says. I won't share with you. And here, Reesha stands up. What about me? Ilahn is caught off guard by this. Mr. Ramu, you are not a part of this. But she smiles. I am now. And then she turns back to Ro. What do you say? Wouldn't you appreciate a more thankful beneficiary? Ro raises an eyebrow. That's an idea. He offers Ilahn one last chance, but the old man declines. Miss Tarabu, Ro says, standing up, let me show you what it means to be touched by the power of the First. He extends a hand, and bright red energy swirls around Reesha, infusing her being. And here we go. The First are back. We last saw some of these fine folks back in CrossGen Chronicles issue 1. A group of 6 of the First gathered to discuss the imminent threat that they saw in the Sigil Bearers. Kessel is clearly still treating them as a bit of a mystery here in Meridian. We don't get to see what it was that Ro offered Ilahn, but we don't really need to either, because we get to see Reesha accept the deal and then start down that particular story path here. Ilahn turning down the deal because he refuses to be subservient to another person makes complete sense for what we have seen of the character so far. He is a bit of a self-made man. He takes great pride in his business acumen and the newfound power of his sigil. Why deal with anyone when he can just punish who he wants, take what he wants, how he wants, and nobody on Demetria seems able to challenge him? I do really appreciate Ilahn being upset that Reesha takes his spot in this line, though. As far as she is concerned, Reesha has already had to accept kind of the dominance of another person, specifically Minister Ilahn of Cadador. She's already given up a portion of her life and freedom to come learn from him. Who knows how much it cost her to travel to Cadador? So why wouldn't Reesha do the same with Ro? Whatever this power is that he offers, it also makes Reesha something more of an equal to Ilahn, and it makes her less reliant on him. Again, this is something that Ilahn would not appreciate, but something that Reesha would. We've only seen, honestly, a little bit of Reesha in this story, but I think that this move makes perfect sense for her. We still don't have a lot of context for who the First are, or what Ro Rustain honestly wants from Ilahn. It sounds like Ilahn has guessed that Ro wants his loyalty, but why? To what end? And now that Reesha owes her own powers to Ro, is she going to be his agent against Ilahn? We do know that the First view the Sigil Bearers as a danger, so maybe this is Ro attempting to kind of like check Ilahn's growing power and lust for more. Meanwhile, the fleet from Meridian is on the move. We find them in gray skies, sailing towards a new home. We get a little bit of John and Mira flirting. Phoebe is sailing with Jad, who promises that he's going to make a sailor out of her yet. Their ship enters the dense cluster of sky islands first. Phoebe is nervous about this. Oh, but Jad is hyped. They will be the first Meridianites to set foot on their new island. Isn't that exciting, Phoebe? Come on! Oh, sure, Phoebe replies quietly. It's wonderful. Jad pauses. I'm sorry, Phoebe. I forgot you're not... She cuts him off. No, I'm not, am I? I'm not Sephie. The only thing I'm good for is ringing the flight patterns with this bell. Don't worry, Jad says. You're more valuable to me than that. We get through this and I will take care of you for a long time after. Phoebe's eyes perk up wider. Will you? I'll make you prove it. Jad then switches topics, telling her to ring out too long. From here, we get a fairly exciting and complicated scene of the two of them navigating the floating, shifting rocks. When Phoebe rings out long bells, that is for the horizontal plane, while short is for vertical. The length of the bell describes the depth of the movement to the other ships in the fleet. Phoebe's inexperience has her questioning Jad, allowing him to explain this method to her, and to us, the audience. Nice job, Barbara Kessel. Jad, however, is just baffled that she never learned ship's calls. And Phoebe gets a little defensive here. Knowing about ships and Meridian was Sephie's job. Mine was to take care of Sephie. I'm sorry that she's gone, but I can't be her, Jad. Hey, I get it, Jad says, moving over to her. I'm John Tacardi's son. The famous captain, adventurer, councilman, best friend of Minister Turos of Meridian. Everyone looks at me and they see the screw-up. Why aren't I him? That's what they want to know. I know what it feels like to feel like you're in second place, Phoebe, but you are your own person. You are your own self. And that's all you ever can be. The two of them are so caught up in their personal drama that Jad nearly misses the massive island that emerges from the fog before them. He shouts the call out, Phoebe rings the bell just in time, and he pulls up on the yoke. Their ship streaks up into the sky, and the bottom of their ship just bounces off the top of the rock, throwing Phoebe from the ship. Jad shouts for her. Phoebe screams. And the safety line goes taut. Oh. Jad pulls on the rope, dragging Phoebe back on board. Guess this justifies the annoying safety line, huh? Phoebe is in not nearly so good a mood. She clutches onto the rope, her eyes squeezed shut, tears running down her cheeks. Jad, will you hate me if I want to stay on land from now on? I would be disappointed, he says. Who would ring my bell for me? But hate you? I'd never hate you, Phoebe. We then fall back to John and Mira's ship as they finish following behind Jad. The fog eventually burns away, revealing a beautiful, twisted island. Greenery runs along its upper surfaces, and several rivers, lakes, and waterfalls are visible even from this distance. John's eyes go wide at the sight of it. Oh, it's beautiful. He then gives a rousing speech about their new home and a hopeful future, and this episode is long enough as it is, so I'm skipping any more details on that. Trust me, it would have you beaming with pride. As with earlier, this scene also does a lot of great world building. Learning how the sailors navigate these rock fields is super neat, and it makes perfect sense. After all, they would have no phones or internet to allow instantaneous communication. But a ship's bell would be relatively easy to make, maintain, and have on a ship. This is so clever. I kind of love it. And I think that this issue's world building is also a big part of what helped make me love Meridian. Between having Steve McNiven on artwork regularly and the world feeling incredibly more well thought out, and the characters having been built so carefully up to this point, I had just kind of fallen in love. To that end, it is also nice to see Jad and Phoebe get a little more screen time. Kessel is obviously exploring the differences between Sephie and Phoebe as people, despite the fact that they're both blonde and they're both very pretty. While Phoebe is smart and brave, we did see her rescue little Georgie back in issue 3, she still isn't comfortable sailing in a tiny ship, risking life and limb to go exploring. She is much more used to a home life situation. The sky is not her home. This isn't just a sensible story detail for Phoebe, it also reinforces the idea that Sephie is comfortable in the sky. Quite frankly, it is also nice to see the two of them openly discuss the main issue that they have in their relationship right now, and that is that Phoebe isn't Sephie, and Jad can't think of her as a replacement if they are going to be in a relationship. Phoebe is her own person. But it does seem like Jad realizes this. That is why Phoebe was tied to the ship, despite her complaints about it. Jad knows that what they're doing is dangerous, and while he is comfortable in the situation, he isn't reckless or stupid. And I would just like to point out that a little bit, maybe Sephie is, just a little bit. She did go flying without a line tied around her. Jad's little pep talk to Phoebe also adds a nice bit of depth to him. We see that he is trying to figure out what it means to be his father's son, even if whatever he is doing his own way. And let's face it, up to this point, Jad has been pretty one note so far. He's just kind of been like the adventuring boy, so this is a nice change for him. Down below, we end the issue with Sephie setting out for the caverns with Hondel, Kotzen, and a woman who we will eventually learn is named Danin. I had to speed read through like the next 4 issues of Meridian to find the first mention of her name. That is how background this character gets. She is with this party for 4 issues and nobody calls her by name. Anyways, they all have backpacks on because they're going to be gone for a minute. And yes, Sephie is walking out of consideration for her companions. She can fly later. Good for you, Sephie. I like your thoughtfulness. Now she just has to be a good enough ambassador to win the people of the caverns to her cause. You know, no one else has ever tried to bridge the sky cities to the ground before, she says. She would be the first. She would be a living link between the land and the sky. Sephie doesn't say this, but the idea here is that she would become a living meridian. A meridian, in boiled down to its ultimate short form, is basically like a midpoint. It originates from Latin, and it referred to the middle of the day. When the sun passed through the zenith of its orbit, the sun passed through a meridian, the highest point in the day. And this works just fine as a nod for Sephie's home island, which is suspended in the air between land and the stars, but Sephie is working to become a human meridian, crossing between all of the connections between sky, surface, and even below, which is a fine, promising, kind of exciting ending for an issue. Next week, I am just going to be covering a single issue of Meridian. Issue 12 of this comic is a pretty big one. Ilahn continues to press Row for more information on his home. Reesha demonstrates her new powers. That's exciting. Sephie demonstrates a new power of her own, and you would kind of expect it, but still, she hasn't done it yet. And she does get a bit of an attitude check as well. We are going to meet an incredibly important new character with a weird backstory, and set up our return to CrossGen's monthly title, CrossGen Chronicles, for its Meridian-focused issue 3. So it's going to be a lot. The week after that, we will do the Chronicles issue, and then we will return to Sephie's ongoing adventures from there on. Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown, episode 32.10 of Meridian, Making Impressions. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.